All right, welcome back to Christy Lee Independent Media, KLIM.news. Yes, I was just on a little bit ago. Working mama, and my guest today also knows what it's like to be a working mama, trying to do all of the things. She is Emerald Robinson. She is the host of Absolute Truth on Frank Speech and so much more. So I'm just going to bring her right in because we're going to try and make this a quick one. So welcome in, Emerald. Thank you so much for trying to do it all, for fitting me in along with everything else.
No, I love it. You know what? I love working with other working moms, especially with the tiny babies, because you're very gracious and you allow people like me a lot of grace. So I know exactly what you're going through, but I'm glad to be with you. It's good to see you again.
You too. So, like I said, we're going to just dive right in because we don't have too much time. Both got other things going on, but I think this topic is important. I actually labeled the snakes in the garden. It was like something that came up to me because it's just so disappointing that we don't know who we can trust. There's been a big great awakening, if you will, with especially after the pandemic, of things might not be as we're told they are, and so we made some headway, but I feel like there's been infiltration even in the conservative movement and the Republican Party. Obviously, many have been awake to that, and so it's just this whole concept of constantly having to wonder who we can trust. We saw it with our president, Donald Trump. I mean, he surrounded himself with people he thought he could trust. And I mean, the biggest example of being betrayed by someone we all thought he could trust is Vice President Mike Pence, right?
Well, yes. However, I had Pence's card much earlier. It became pretty apparent to me in 2018 that he was not the kind of good actor that he portrays himself as, this, honest, solid man of faith who is the loyal vice president to Donald Trump, who's busy just out there selling his agenda and in no way is causing Donald Trump any harm. It became very clear when I looked at the people who was on his staff and in his office. He had people who did not like Donald Trump at all, who were absolutely antithetical, their ideology antithetical to the Trump agenda. And it became very clear early on to me that they were working against the Trump agenda from within the White House, essentially. Technically, they were over at the old executive office building where the vice president's offices are housed. Another trigger for me, a trigger warning about Pence was his original chief of staff was a man named Josh Pitcock. What many people didn't notice was that Josh Pitcock was married to a woman named Catherine Seaman. She continued to go by her maiden last name, so people probably didn't initially find the connection. But Miss Catherine Seaman was actually one of the top analysts at the FBI, working directly with none other than Peter Strzok, who is that infamous agent who had the love affair with the lawyer Lisa Page, and they hatched the so-called insurance plan in 2016 in case that Donald Trump won, and that is what essentially became the Russia hoax, and we all know that history. So clearly, the mole was in Pence's office. Remember, there were all kinds of leaks that led to the firing of General Michael Flynn, right? And there was lots of fallout, but there continued to be moles all along, Christy, that were housed in the vice president's office. Sometimes they couldn't get into the main West Wing, but they could certainly get them into the vice president's office. A couple other names was Jennifer Williams, who was perfectly placed in Vice President Pence's office, conveniently just a few months or a few weeks actually ahead of that Ukraine call that became the basis for the Ukraine impeachment hoax, in which she testified. At what point did she tell her boss she was going to testify? What did Mike Pence say to that? Then it was also another, there was Olivia Troy, who was the one from Pence's office who headed up the COVID task force. Because remember, Donald Trump gave it over to Mike Pence. And you know who Mike Pence then turned it over to? Olivia Troy. Well, you wouldn't even know that name at the moment that it was happening. But she turned out to be some kind of national security state figure with a murky background and intelligence. And she now does interviews on MSNBC and CNN regularly with Lord Fauci's portrait behind her. And she had always had very critical things to say of former President Donald Trump. And a lot of the policies that were put in place under the Trump administration is what directly led to mail-in ballots and COVID restrictions that allowed for more rigging of the election that lost him the office. So yeah, you have to be careful what you trust. But I do want to get back to something you said, because I think you've hit on something here. One thing I noticed in corporate media that I got a big lesson in, and it became obvious to me. I didn't know this at first. I just started to watch people around me and realize that some people didn't seem to be who they said they were. And I realized that the intelligence community, I realized this on my own at first, were putting assets in corporate media. Then I heard, do you know who Adam Housley is? He's a former Fox foreign correspondent. He gave it up a long time ago. He was married to one of the Tia whatever they were, the sister. He went off.
Yeah, of course I remember that.
He went off and became a vintner, and he left it behind. But I remember him doing this tweet thread about how every single corporate media entity was infiltrated by both the CIA and the FBI. Well, I could tell that even when working in conservative media, once outlets started getting a lot of attention, and the ones who have been considered friend or not part of corporate did during the Donald Trump years, there started to be some interesting people showing up. And then I heard Lara Logan talking about it in 2020 or 2021, which further confirmed my suspicions. And I can tell you, in working at one particular outlet that is not OAN, the other one I worked at, Newsmax, I had to wonder when some things started seeming a bit odd. And Lara confirmed to me that happens everywhere. So you have to expect that even in what we consider patriot media, that there will probably be some, infiltration, because look what has happened, especially since Tucker Carlson left Fox. People have become more and more aware of the other media sources that they can go directly to. They don't have to turn on their TV and turn it to Fox or CNN. They find that when they go on, other platforms, they get more honest information than they get from any of those. And they've been turning to those in droves. And you see the corporate media absolutely screaming about it. I can tell you from personal knowledge, the intelligence community is as well.
Yeah. And I mean, in just my last interview, we were talking about how we've come to know, and people know what rhino means, Republican in name only. And we've seen that be infiltrated. And it really all comes back to greed and money, and how they can bring in the most and just screw the American people, screw about our freedoms and our liberty and our independence. It's just all led by money and corruption. And we know them by rhinos, and sometimes we don't know that they're rhinos, and then when they reveal themselves, the jury's still out on Speaker Johnson. I don't like that he was cozying up to others we've come to know as rhinos. But to that end, I feel like we need to start something new and say sinos, like conservative in name only or Christian in name only, because there's a lot of that going on. But I found one of your Substack articles particularly interesting, and it was about, we've been kind of suspicious of Elon Musk because not everything is perfect on Twitter. And, we should be cautiously optimistic there. But one of the people that has been supposedly exposing all of this has been Michael Schellenberger. And you wrote a really interesting piece on him. And it really got me thinking, because, I will admit that I just kind of accepted that Schellenberger was, and Matt Taibbi, they were on our side, and he must have a lot of journalism experience. But as I read your article, I'm like, wait, where did he come from? You mean he isn't this like longtime journalist that is now exposing the corruption that we've come to know on Twitter? So tell me, I know we don't have a ton of time, but if you could summarize this article so that others know the deal on this, or to at least be asking questions, that would be nice.
Well, look, Schellenberger came out of nowhere. And when someone comes out of nowhere, I'm immediately wary, especially considering that he was doing a lot of reporting that had already been out there in the past and was getting great acclaim for it. I have talked to Matt Taibbi. I do not have the same thoughts about him as I do Schellenberger, although I do recognize that Matt Taibbi is also taking credit for a lot of reporting that was done previously by, say, Uncover DC's Tracy Beans, or some of the other, journalists that we know that are great, and some might work. And since I wrote the article, I wrote two on Michael Schellenberger. I cannot tell you how many people, both anonymous accounts plus high profile journalists and analysts and former intel, who have told me that Michael Schellenberger has directly stolen, copied their work, in some cases verbatim. One gentleman could point me to the passage in his book that Michael Schellenberger had lifted directly out of for some of his COVID reporting. Then I began, when I questioned Michael Schellenberger, I just wanted to look up his background and see, well, where did he come from? I know he had been a candidate for governor in California, but that was also bizarre. His backing and getting it as a candidate. Turns out he'd also done PR, public relations, for none other than Hugo Chavez. He was this green activist, but then he went to sell nuclear energy, which as a lobbyist, which makes no sense if he was this green activist. And his background is full of all of these contradictions. And he has this resume that just goes from here to here to here. He's a real Renaissance man, but nowhere does he, seem to have the expertise it requires when he lands in this job. And I can tell you, I've covered the intelligence community long enough. I've been based in DC long enough to tell you, when someone does that, it strongly suggests an intelligence community tie. Now, there is Mark Robert, who was an LA Weekly reporter. He was a producer at HBO. He also did a deep dive into Schellenberger. I came across his work when I was doing my research, and he had done a lot of it. And Mark had found a possible tie to this other Schellenberger, or Shelley Schellenberger, who he believes, we'll just say that he believes, and the information strongly suggests he could be Schellenberger's father. Well, that man is a retired CIA agent. And what we know is that they long use their families. They often groom their children to be assets or to work in an industry and to be, informants and assets. And we've seen that particularly, look, there was the Laurel Canyon music scene was built on that same practice. Deep military intelligence basically Jim Morrison was the son of a high-ranking military intelligence official. And the CIA had a station, a base on Laurel Canyon. I would strongly suggest that people go and look for Mark Robert's. He has done such amazing deep dives, and he just really understands Marxist infiltration and the nefarious practices of the intelligence state to push narratives and their information. And so that was very helpful in my dive. But then, as I said, a lot of people started reaching out to me and telling me they'd had a similar experience. Now, I can tell you for a fact, Schellenberger didn't even write a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
He had a ghostwriter. I think that ghostwriter has outed himself. I won't say his name just because, I have had conversations. So, but I feel that person has now outed themselves. So your audience is probably well-versed and can guess, but Schellenberger is just being propped up by his source, who he used the information. He's stolen information from other sources and journalists. And he seems to also, in some weird way, be a creation of Elon Musk. Why? Why did Musk choose him? I don't know. Was it suggested to Elon Musk? I don't know. That remains to be seen.
Well, it's just a great reminder that we always need to be cautious. And, I think you would think that I would have learned my lesson when I was like a fangirl of George W. Bush at one point, only because I read somewhere that he reads his Bible every day. I'm like, oh, well, he's a good Christian man then. And you would have think, obviously, I don't believe that now. I think that he's a liar, part of the deep state. I could go on and on, but it's crazy that sometimes that's all it takes is somebody to say, oh, I read the Bible, or I'm a Christian. And you just unfortunately are like, oh, okay, then we're on the same page. But it's so not the case. And it's just a great reminder that we constantly need to be on the guard. We constantly need to be using our discernment. And before wrapping this up, what you said about stealing the content. That is another problem that we're seeing in conservative media. It's been encouraged essentially to steal each other's stuff, usually from smaller accounts, and repost with this new structure on Twitter. And it's really been disgusting to see, because the same people, the same biggest names in conservative media that would talk about Claudine Gay and how she was a plagiarist and how she, shouldn't have ever been at Harvard and it was all DI, whatever, are the same people that are plagiarizing other people's work so that they can bring the cash coming in. So it's just really disappointing.
Well, it happens to me quite often, and it used to bother me more, but my husband put it in perspective to me. He's like, there's no greater compliment than to influence the messaging out there. And at the end of the day, you just want the truth to get to people. You want the information to get to people. And he reminded me that I'm not the most important person in the room. And sometimes you need that reminder, and that it's really about the truth getting out there. And ever since we had that conversation, because, I'm human, I can have some pride. I didn't like it, but it did help. But when you are trying to support yourself and your family, and, as journalists, the way, we add value is that the information we give, right? It's almost like an invention. You have the copy, you have the patent for it. Well, this is our copyright, but it's just, as a journalist, that can be very hard. And it's much easier for people to take the silly. I do wish that there was more uplifting, helping each other, because one thing I did notice, Christy, in the White House press corps, is that the libs, they really helped each other out with their lying. They supported each other in their propaganda. They were glad to see that girl get the job at the network, for the most part. You might sometimes see a little bit of jealousy. They were very supportive of one another, and they all worked well together, no matter what network they were at. And that just didn't seem to be the case with conservative media.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to send you on your way, but I'll leave it with this, like with what you said about the truth being so important to get out there. That is the ultimate thing. And so I think we need to be leery moving forward. Yes, we've had to get creative with ways that the conservative side can make money, because the corporate control of the mass media information machine is so tight with the advertising and everything that people have to come up with creative ways to get paid for their work. But, it should be a red flag anytime that there's large subscription fees. That should be for like extra content that doesn't necessarily matter, or like more personal experience. But when it comes to the truth that needs to be out there and sharing it, like, be leery of people that want to put that behind like a big paywall, because that is a sign that the money matters more than the truth, right?
Yeah, I understand the conundrum of having to make money in order to pay staff, and there is definitely a balance. But I do think there is a concerted effort to remove some voices from the conversation, and I think people need to look out for that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'll let you get back to your busy work mom life, and I'm going to do the same. Thank you so much, Emerald.
Thanks, Christy.
All right, folks. So thanks for joining me. Like, look how disheveled I look, because I'm trying to do it all. I'm trying to come to you and speak to you, and I'm going to do whatever I can to always be honest and open about what we're facing, and any information I get, I'm going to try and pass along to you. And so I'm going to find my own creative ways to do that. So thank you so much for joining me. And don't forget to share and like and support whoever it is. It doesn't even have to be me, but whoever you feel like is truly, you've discerned, is truly caring about the truth and information. Make sure that you find ways to support them, because we're in the fight, and it is a hard fight with so much that we're up against. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.